Luck isn't the opposite of physics, it's what we call physics when nobody expected the outcome. If you think the luckiest survivors simply beat impossible odds, you're wrong. Their survival depended on timing, probability, and several independent events aligning within seconds. In this video, we'll examine 4 documented cases from 1972, 1983, 2008, and 2018. Each began with an ordinary mistake that should have ended in a fatal outcome. Instead, one overlooked variable redirected the chain of events. Sometimes it was engineering, sometimes biology. Sometimes nothing more than being in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. None of these people ignored physical laws. They survived because those laws interacted in ways few people could have predicted. This isn't a collection of inspirational stories. It's an examination of probability, human limitations, and measurable cause and effect. Every impossible survival begins with one ordinary mistake. Case 1. The plane that didn't kill him. On January 26, 1972, a McDonnell Douglas the 600th, 9 cruising at approximately 10,160 meters, 33,330 feet, broke apart over what was then Czechoslovakia. At that altitude, the aircraft was traveling near 800 kilometers per hour, or about 500 miles per hour. Under ordinary conditions, no passenger compartment is designed to remain intact after structural separation at cruising speed, yet one section behaved differently. Flight attendant Vesna Volovich remained trapped inside part of the fuselage as it detached from the aircraft. Instead of falling as scattered debris, this larger section retained structure, increasing air resistance and slowing its descent compared with smaller fragments. Its final path carried it into a heavily forested, snow-covered hillside. Trees absorbed part of the remaining kinetic energy before the fuselage struck the ground, and deep snow further increased the stopping distance. Extending deceleration over even a fraction of a second significantly reduces the peak forces experienced by the human body. Investigators concluded that multiple protective factors acted together rather than individually. Vesna was pinned inside the wreckage by a service cart, limiting uncontrolled movement during impact. While restraint under these conditions would usually increase injury risk, here it reduced the likelihood of secondary collisions inside the collapsing cabin. The fuselage itself functioned as an improvised survival compartment, distributing some impact forces around rather than directly through its occupants. The human body tolerates acceleration only within limited ranges. Short-duration loads of 20 to 30 g can sometimes be survivable under specific conditions, while higher forces rapidly increase the probability of fatal injury. Survival depends not only on peak acceleration but also on direction, duration, restraint, and how energy is dissipated. Medical reports documented multiple fractures, severe blood loss, and prolonged unconsciousness, yet vital organs remained sufficiently protected to sustain life until rescuers reached the site. The rescue began within hours despite difficult winter conditions. Her recovery became internationally recognized, not because one improbable event occurred, but because structural breakup, terrain, energy absorption, body position, and rapid medical care aligned in an extraordinarily uncommon sequence. Survival depended on multiple unlikely variables occurring simultaneously. Case 2. The Lightning Survivor. On June 5, 2018, a recreational hiker sought shelter beneath a tree as a thunderstorm approached. Within milliseconds, a cloud-to-ground lightning discharge struck nearby. A typical lightning bolt carries up to 300 million volts and approximately 30,000 amperes of current, although the highest current lasts only a few milliseconds. The plasma channel reaches nearly 30,000 degrees Celsius, or about 54,000 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly 5 times hotter than the sun's surface. By comparison, a household outlet supplies about 120 to 240 volts. Despite those measurements, the hiker survived. The reason was not reduced electrical energy, it was the pathway the current followed. In some documented cases, moisture from rain or perspiration allows electricity to travel rapidly across the body's exterior in a phenomenon known as surface flashover. Instead of passing directly through the chest, a significant portion of the current remains on the skin before exiting to the ground. Severe burns may still occur, but vital organs can receive less electrical exposure than expected. The electricity wasn't less powerful, it simply followed a different route. Even during a surface flashover, the nervous and cardiovascular systems remain at risk. Electrical current can interrupt the heart's normal rhythm by disrupting the synchronized movement of cardiac muscle cells. Breathing may also stop because the respiratory muscles briefly lose coordinated nerve signals. Without immediate treatment, oxygen delivery to the brain rapidly declines. Witnesses called emergency services within minutes. Paramedics found the patient unconscious but with recoverable cardiac activity. Oxygen support, continuous cardiac monitoring, and rapid transport to hospital care prevented secondary complications. Medical recovery required weeks rather than minutes, but survival ultimately depended on milliseconds. The discharge obeyed the same physical laws as every other lightning strike. One common outcome resulted from current distribution, rapid medical intervention, and probability aligning at exactly the right moment. Case 3. The Falling Elevator Myth. If you think modern elevators become uncontrolled free-falling boxes after a cable failure, you're wrong. Multiple independent safety systems are designed specifically to prevent that sequence. One documented example occurred on May 19, 2018, when an elevator in a New York residential building descended several floors after an internal malfunction. Although occupants experienced a rapid drop, the system did not continue accelerating until impact. Modern passenger elevators typically travel between 1 and 10 meters per second, or about 3 to 33 feet per second, depending on the building's height. As the car exceeded its permitted speed, an overspeed governor activated. This mechanical device triggered progressive safety brakes, forcing hardened steel shoes against the guide rails. Instead of stopping instantly, the braking force increased over a controlled distance, dissipating kinetic energy while reducing peak deceleration. That distinction matters because the human body tolerates gradual deceleration far better than abrupt impact. Bones, muscles, and connective tissue distribute force over time. Extending the stopping distance by even a few centimeters or several inches lowers the peak acceleration transmitted through the spine and lower limbs. Occupants still experience substantial loading, but the probability of severe injury decreases compared with an uncontrolled stop. Contrary to popular advice, jumping just before impact provides almost no benefit. Human reaction time averages approximately 250 milliseconds, while the final phase of an elevator stop occurs too quickly for meaningful repositioning. Remaining upright with knees slightly flexed and maintaining balance offers better biomechanical support than attempting to time a jump that cannot accurately match the elevator's motion. Investigators determined that the primary protective factor was not luck or passenger action, it was engineering redundancy. Independent braking systems, reinforced guide rails, and controlled energy dissipation performed their intended functions even after another component malfunctioned. The equipment failed exactly as designed. Case 4. The ship that almost sank twice. On July 23, 2006, the vehicle carrier MV Cougar Ace was approximately 370 kilometers, or 230 miles, south of Alaska when the crew began a routine ballast water transfer. Within minutes, an error during the procedure caused the ship to heal rapidly until it listed about 60 degrees. Thousands of tons of seawater had shifted between ballast tanks, moving the vessel's center of gravity beyond its intended operating range. The initial failure should have led to another. Instead, several independent systems interrupted the sequence. Internal watertight compartments limited uncontrolled flooding, while the hull retained sufficient buoyancy despite its extreme angle. Crew members followed emergency procedures, transmitted a distress call, and evacuated before conditions deteriorated further. Salvage teams arrived days later, bringing specialized pumps capable of transferring thousands of liters or hundreds of gallons of water each minute to gradually restore balance. The outcome depended on probability stacking rather than a single decisive action. A ballast error created instability. Compartmentalization prevented progressive flooding. Structural redundancy preserved buoyancy. Timely communication ensured outside assistance reached the vessel before weather conditions changed. The ship remained afloat because multiple protective layers compensated for earlier failures. None of them were perfect alone. Together, they prevented an accident that could easily have ended with the loss of the vessel and everyone aboard. Each of these cases appears unique. They aren't. The underlying pattern is remarkably consistent. Luck is rarely a single improbable event. Instead, it emerges when several independent probabilities align within a narrow window of time. One variable reduces speed, another redirects force, a third preserves normal body function long enough for rescue. Remove any one of those factors, and the outcome changes completely. Physics determines how energy moves. Biology determines how much of that energy the human body can tolerate. Human decision-making influences exposure, but only within certain limits. Average reaction time is approximately 250 milliseconds, or 1/4 of a second. Many critical events, including structural failures and lightning strikes, develop faster than conscious decisions can influence them. Preparation matters because it shapes the decisions made before those milliseconds arrive. Statistically, surviving one low-probability event is uncommon. Surviving several independent failures occurring in a beneficial sequence is far less likely. That is why these stories remain memorable decades later. They demonstrate that survival is not evidence that physical laws stopped applying. It is evidence that timing, engineering, physiology, and probability briefly aligned in the same direction before separating again. None of these people defeated physics. The same physical laws that usually produce fatal outcomes were present in every case. Gravity still accelerated falling wreckage. Electricity still followed conductive pathways. Mechanical systems still failed within their design limits. The difference was that several independent variables interacted in an unusually favorable sequence. That distinction matters because it changes how we understand survival. Calling these events luck suggests they were beyond explanation. Examining them reveals measurable causes: energy dissipation, structural redundancy, current distribution, body positioning, rapid medical intervention, and probability. Each factor contributed only a small advantage. Together, they became sufficient. Most people will never experience circumstances like these, but understanding why these survivors lived is more valuable than believing they experienced a miracle. Physics never paused. Biology never changed. For a brief moment, the numbers aligned, and the outcome followed accordingly. History remembers these events as extraordinary examples of luck. Science remembers them as measurable sequences of probability, physics, and biology. The difference matters because understanding the mechanism is always more useful than accepting the mystery. Every impossible survival leaves behind evidence explaining why it happened and why it almost didn't. If you enjoy examining the precise moments where survival and fatal outcomes separate by seconds, centimeters, or simple decisions, you're in the right place. Subscribe to The Breath Before, where every episode analyzes extraordinary survival through documented evidence, engineering, human physiology, and the physical laws that shape every outcome.